Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. And I'm so pleased to be joined by David Fish. David and I have known each other for a few years now, and so it's lovely to be able to have a conversation with you, David, about what you're doing and all things deliberate leadership.
Awesome. Thank you, Rita. Great to be here today.
Yeah, lovely. It was good to have you here. I'm going to introduce you properly so our audience knows who you are. David Fish is a globally recognised strategist, business leader, best-selling author, and record-breaking pilot. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that today. David's got an extensive career in marketing and advertising. This saw you rise to Chief Strategy Officer, and you've worked with and advised some of the world's largest brands and continue to do so today, as well as lead global agency networks, tech startups, and media companies. And giving them a deep understanding of what it takes to connect, engage, and convince. So I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. And we know, though, you are more than a corporate powerhouse. You're a world record holder, a British and Australian aviation champion, and a commercial pilot. Fishy, as he is affectionately known, and I still can't bring myself to call you that after 4 years, but I will at some point, brings a fresh perspective that not only excites the mind, but challenges our perceptions of the boundless possibilities that await us. Welcome, a very warm welcome to you, David.
Thank you.
Fishy, I will start to call you Fishy. Does everyone call you Fishy?
Pretty much. We get there pretty quickly. The Australian naming convention, surname plus a Y. Yeah, we get, once people get comfortable, it doesn't, yeah. I mean, that's how I sign off on my emails and even the website. So yeah.
Good. And it's you can't do that with my surname. It just doesn't work.
No, we need to shorten it.
Yeah, I know. We need to do something with it. Well, it's really good to have you on today. I know you've been doing, and you have for the time that we've known each other. I love that you're always doing interesting things, particularly in that strategy work with leaders and through leaders. And so I thought today we'd have a conversation just about deliberate leadership, what you're seeing, and what you experience in your world. I might start with a question, Fishy, on when you're working with the leaders and the organizations that you do, and they're such big names, what stands out to you when they're in that mode of being a really deliberate leader? Like what do you see and what do you observe?
It's a great question. And I'll define sort of levels. I work across functional teams, so marketing teams, operational teams, not just in that sort of C-suite. So kind of my perspective, yes, I go up to board level conversations, but I'm really interested actually in leadership at operational level, because I think that's where a lot of the rubber hits the road. And so the first thing is this, and it's an area where I do quite a bit of work, but being able to define a motivating direction, to set out where next and the why, kind of a rally cry, a unifying ambition. People call it different things, doesn't matter what you call it. It's that there's direction, and that people know how their work contributes to something more than just the work they're doing. And this is where that level piece becomes really important, because sometimes people think that comes from the top and there's a vision for the company. But the leader's job throughout the business, as we go through that sort of different levels of leadership, their job needs to start by translating that into, as a team, how are we working towards something meaningful? Yes, you may not be doing all of the business transformation to the vision, but we have to be able to connect that from the top all the way through every level. And every leader's job is to be able to do that. The leader can't articulate the where next and the why, then that for me is where things start to go off the rails. Underneath that then sits being able to give and receive feedback. And I'll link this to one of the best teams I've ever been involved in. I've spent a lot of time analyzing this team and why it was so successful. Was a skydiving team that I was part of in the UK, and we went on to win the British Championship. So group of mates got together, we went, what are we going to do? Let's get some medals. And we worked pretty hard for that. And if you break that down, one of the things that sat in there that we were exceptionally focused on was feedback. After every jump we did, after every practice, we had 3 good things and 1 thing to improve. And it was always in that ratio. So there were 3 things you could take away from that and go tick, 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 brilliant, lock those away. We're talking about 45 seconds of practice. So there's 1 thing you're taking into that next 45 seconds. Now you think about businesses, we often operate in 1-hour meetings, 45-minute conversations. Imagine if you just walked out of a meeting, went 3 great things, 1 thing we could improve. If we kind of have that mindset of regular feedback at all levels, and again, this is going up and down, then we start to get into the next piece, which I think is a great challenge for a lot of people, which is accountability. Accountability of the leaders to the decisions that they make and the outcomes of those, and then holding and expecting the same standard across the team. And that, I think, is a real challenge for many, being accountable themselves to the things that they do and the things that happen, but also holding the team to that. And that is kind of my big area that sort of sits underneath that, which is where I think this goes wrong is self-awareness and self-confidence. When you're not confident in who you are, what you bring, where your own gaps and limitations are, then that accountability becomes really difficult. And if we use our first analogy for the day, every car's got two side mirrors and a rear view mirror, even F1 cars, the fastest cars on the planet, because every car has a blind spot. And we're the same. Every single person has a blind spot or two. If someone is invincible, perfect, never wrong, always across everything, has all the answers, I can't understand why they haven't been promoted yet, we've got a massive self-awareness gap. And then we start to miss potentially some of the insecurities that are left unchecked, and then we get into a crash at some point. So when the leader's perfect, it erodes that trust. When the trust goes, it's impossible to be accountable. And when you don't have accountability, then we get into blame.
Yeah.
And so at the top, we've got this direction. At the bottom, we've got this erosion of trust. And if we don't have the direction that goes all the way through to that trust in the team, to accountability to what we're doing, that's where I see teams go off the rails.
Yeah. So you've mentioned so many good kind of chunky points there that I'd love to explore a little bit more, because I think particularly that giving and receiving feedback. So that method of 3 good things to 1 thing to improve makes so much sense when you like a 45-second skydive, I think, is that what you're talking about there with that? And then, we could absolutely extend that into 45-minute lots of something which are maybe more accessible for people, because I don't think everyone's skydiving. But it makes sense, because when you're going into your next dive, that one thing is probably all your brain can reasonably take and absorb.
That's right.
Have you ever been in a situation where it's been really hard for you to pick the one thing that you want to say to the person because you've noticed more than one thing? And what do you do with that?
That's the challenge. So I think what we're very good at, because we're inclined towards catastrophizing, and we're good at seeing the negative, not the positive in most situations, what you tend to find, and the reason for that balance is what you tend to find is 3 bad things and 1 good.
Yeah.
And so so imagine you walk out of a meeting, it's an hour-long meeting, which means it's been a 45-minute presentation, a couple of minutes at the end for questions. If you walk out of that and go, what was great about that meeting? And you force yourself to find 3 things that were good. And you might be down to the water was chilled, but it doesn't matter, right? If you force yourself to find 3 good things and then go, what's the biggest thing? Because by getting to 1, we're trying to get to this idea that something is more important than something else.
Yeah.
When you go 3 bad things, you're then getting down to the minutiae of, well, the water was warm. Doesn't matter, right? Actually didn't change the outcome. 3 good things, or what's the one thing in the next meeting? Because particularly inside large organizations, often you're going from that meeting to the next meeting. If you're presenting again in an hour's time, what could you change as you walk the floor between that meeting room and the next meeting room to improve the next presentation? It might be your presence walking into the room. It might be how you open the meeting. It might be the questions that you ask. If there's one thing that could change the outcome of the next meeting from this meeting, that's the same mindset. We in business, we actually don't have a lot of time. And what tends to happen is we go through cycles of collecting feedback. We get into the annual review, the quarterly catch up, or whatever it is, even the weekly whip, and we unload on people with, again, a lot of negativity, because we're very good at storing up and remembering the negative things.
Yeah.
So it's the ratio of those 3 things. It's the 3 to 1, because sometimes we try and make the shit sandwich where we have the good bit of feedback, work on this, the good bit of feedback, and try and sandwich the negative in the middle. This was great, this was great, this was great. If we could work on this, it would be amazing.
Yeah, I think that's such a great strategy for people to just play with, because it's not artificial like the shit sandwich that we've been taught for decades, right? That we've been taught that that's the best way to give feedback, and it's not. I think people walk away from those experiences going, you softened me up to deliver a really difficult piece of news, and now you're buttering me at the end. So I'm leaving, and I feel that I've retained trust, or that I can trust you, and it feels very artificial. Whereas I think to go good, and here's one thing to improve.
And again, it's universal, so it's not one person giving feedback to a group of other. It's everyone giving feedback to everyone, and because it's bite-sized, you're not sitting there for 2 hours trying to figure out what to say. It should literally be, if you've had an internal meeting and there's 3 of you in it, all 3 people go, this was what I loved about this meeting. Would have been great if we had more time for Q&A.
Yeah.
And so you get it's collective as opposed to let me give you some feedback. It should be everyone sharing for everybody to listen to.
And Dave, you mentioned on that point around accountability. So you talked about leaders ultimately having that accountability. I guess that role model role around setting the cadence for how we're giving feedback, how we're setting strategy, how we're delegating bits of work. But off the back of that discussion around feedback, there's also something in there around we are all accountable for doing this. So often with teams, and you would find this no doubt in the work that you do, there's so much emphasis on the leader doing all the stuff that kind of keeps the dynamics of the team smooth. But in actual fact, when you've got every team player playing to the same kind of script, and we're all accountable for the method of feedback, if you like, around the 3 to 1, we're all accountable for maintaining and building trust. What are your views on that around trust? Like, do you think that there's more weighting on the leader, or do you see it as distributed across the team and in experience of the teams that you've worked with?
So I think the thing with the leadership position is everyone's looking at it, and everyone's mirroring the behavior of that person. So there is because of the nature of, let's say there's 10 people in a team and there's one leader, it's 10 to 1. The behavior and the follow through of the leader is setting a very, very important tone. So if the leadership narrative doesn't match the leadership actions, that will immediately erode trust in the team, because we feel that, we judge that, we can, words and actions have to align. But absolutely, the team needs to do its bit within that. Now, some of that comes from what are we all working towards? Are we all in the same boat? Are we all pulling in the same direction? If we're not, and my objective is different to your objective, which also is different to what the leader's trying to achieve, well, that's also going to cause tension within the team. And a lot of times, what I find is that the tension's kind of obvious, but no one wants to talk about it. So I do a lot of work outside of companies, so in offsites, retreats, away days, workshops, call them what you like. Everyone's got a different name for it, for all sorts of different reasons. But often within the first couple of hours, sometimes sooner, the tension's obvious. Like the elephant in the room has been drawn quite clearly. And actually my job is then to talk about the elephant and to bring it into the conversation, because for some reason it hasn't been discussed. And there's kind of this, finally we're talking about the elephant kind of feeling. And so there's this weird thing around tension. And again, I think it comes back to confidence. Sometimes that tension is coming from a weakness somewhere that hasn't been discussed, and people are trying to cover up that actually we need to talk about this, but that is also showing a sign of weakness, and we're uncomfortable with that because weakness becomes a threat. That's how our brain works. If I show I'm weak, then the saber-toothed tiger might get me, because that's how we've grown up as a species to think and feel. So I think when there's tension, give it attention, is my other little acronym. When you can feel tension in any situation, whether it's yourself, so if you feel tension in yourself, stop and go, why is that? Yeah. Give attention to that tension, because our inclination is to bury the tension, and it will always be there, and it's just festering, and it's just getting worse, and it's making us anxious, it's making our muscles tight. It's triggering anger at some points in meetings, or a reaction we're not sure where it came from. But it came from the tension that we buried 3 months ago, we've lived with. And the same in teams. That tension in a team meeting or in a conversation should be explored, and that will build trust as opposed to erode trust.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right. It's because often we perceive it as it's a really hard thing. That it's usually a precursor to a difficult conversation, or a conversation we perceive to be really difficult, or we go, oh no, I don't have time, or we go, oh, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and if I see a little bit of a pattern, then I'll give it some attention. But you're right, it does end up festering and creating then some issues down the track. So I really like that. So far, in terms of the hot tips, we've got 3 to 1 in terms of our feedback, 3 good things, 1 to improve, but then where there's tension, give it attention. So if you are listening along, write these down, because I think they are gold, little nuggets of gold from Fishy. All right. So the next question where I want to go, because given your work particularly in strategy and the work that you do with teams, I was interested in how you help others, but also how you do it for yourself, around navigating this balance between being adaptable, because you do in setting new strategy, responding to what's going on. So being adaptable, but also staying true to your path, I guess, and your deliberate leader path or your principles, particularly in a constantly changing business landscape, which you and I were just talking about just before we hit record. How do you navigate that balance of being adaptable but also staying true?
There's two parts to this thing. I'll go to the second part, which is perspective. And perspective comes at different intervals based on the pace of change. But what I mean by perspective is that most of the time in the business, what we're doing is running through corn. Right? We're in the do, and the leader should be out of that as much as possible, but inevitably over time gets drawn in by the team needing help. Often, particularly for early leaders, they've just come from being on the tools, doing the job, and now they've stepped into a leadership position, and that they themselves are making that transition from doing to leading. And so often in that transition, it's very easy to go back to being on the tools, doing the job. And so when we're all in the corn, none of us know where we're going. And so that perspective, for me, the leader should be in the helicopter most of the time and be able to land the helicopter and run through the corn and help where needed, but be in the helicopter and kind of therefore look across the fields and go, yep, we're harvesting the right one. Yep, this is good. Weather's good. Market conditions are good. We're in the right place. And what happens when the leader gets drawn down too much and doesn't come up and take stock is we all get lost together. And then we have that offsite and we do the whatever it is, quarterly, half yearly offsite, and everyone presents for 45 minutes on what they've done and what they're going to do, which is basically, this is the cornfield I've harvested and this is the cornfield I'm going to next. That's not perspective.
Yeah.
Perspective is leave that stuff behind and get up and get into the landscape of what's happening. Literally look at the business as though like an out of body experience. You're outside the business. The reason for leaving the business and going offsite is to physically change the perspective of being able to look at the building and go, what's going on in that building as an outsider, and feel like you're looking on into the business. And in a period of extreme change, so let's call it pandemics, where at 11 o'clock every day what we can do, where how we can trade changes, you want to stay in that perspective place. If it's a business that moves in a, let's call it quarterly to half yearly to annual sort of shift, then you can do those kind of quarterly, half yearly offsites. Maybe annual. Annual for me is a long time in most businesses, even today. I said the other day, we used to do 10-year plans and they became 5-year plans and now they're 3-month plans. There is a role still, in my view, for 3 years. I think 3 years is a good anchor point for most businesses. But we often then go from 3 years to 3 minutes, and 3 minutes is in the corn. So you, as a leader, you kind of want to feel that and go, I've lost perspective. I'm actually now with the team so much, I don't know where we are on the, if I look at the operation as a map, I'm so in the where next destination, I can't see where we are from a big picture perspective. And that's the idea of the helicopter versus the corn, is you jump in the helicopter and go, oh, I get it. We've actually just been going around in a circle for the last 3 months. We're all lost. Right, great. That's the direction again. And you reset and you can go. So that perspective piece for me is huge.
Fishy, do you think like people that have that ability to look up rather than be in the cornfield, do you reckon there's something, do you reckon that's just naturally how they are wired, or do you think it's something that can be learnt?
I definitely think it can be learned. I think the challenge with it is the recency with which you've stopped doing the work. And so this transition from manager or specialist to leader, and letting go of, you're not doing the work anymore. The output is now the sum of the parts, and the parts are the team, and your job is to run the team, not drive the combine harvester. And yes, you know how to do that, and that's fantastic. And there's other jobs you don't know how to do quite so well. And this is also where we get a bias in leadership towards, you've come from finance, you love the finance team more than you love the marketing team, or you come from marketing, etc. Because we gravitate to what we know, particularly in times of stress and pressure. And so we give that team more because we're comfortable doing that. This adaptability at leadership is, if you stay out of the detail across all teams, you can give each team the same amount of love, if you like. You can spread your guidance across. But when you've come from somewhere recently, if you're 3, 6, 12 months in a leadership role, having been in the marketing team and now you're leading a broader function across the business, so you've come from specialist into generalist as a leader, you've got to really work quite hard on staying in that generalist position and being there to guide, to answer questions, to set direction, not do the work. And so I find that early transition is the hardest time, because it's so easy to jump back into, oh, I can do that, or we should do it like this, and go from giving advice and direction to doing and being hands-on again.
I love this topic in particular because I see a lot of leaders that I put it down to what they value. So in terms of their self-worth and value. So if their value and identity is tied up in being able to operate the machinery versus being able to kind of be up in the whatever aircraft it is, having a look down below, I find that they will typically gravitate towards going to the thing that makes them feel valuable and makes them feel worthy, because that's where they are used to being. That's where they're used to, I guess, adding that value, but that's also what's being recognized. So it goes to this recency point that you talk about. So if your last gig was to run a particular function and now you're stepping up into that executive level and now you're leading, a part of the business which incorporates, broader areas than what you ever had and have, I think that's where a lot of leaders struggle. And what do you reckon about that? Like, do you think, is there anything that resonates for you in that value and worthy piece?
Yes. So let's dive into this one. So I do a piece of work with SAS commandos transitioning out of the SAS into civilian work. And this is true in workforces as well. And I call it being defined by title.
Yeah.
If you're defined by title, you've lost control of who you are.
Yeah.
Because I can take that title away from you at any moment. I can move you somewhere else in the business. I can demote you, promote you, or fire you, or make you redundant. You're not in control of your identity the minute you're defined by a title, whatever that title is. And it becomes more critical at more senior levels. I am a CEO. No, you're not. You're a human being that has the skills and capabilities to lead a group of people, which currently has the moniker of CEO. So being defined by something you don't own is incredibly dangerous for our identity, but also then our mental health that's attached to identity. So we have to know, which is kind of the second part of this question. It's a beautiful lead in. We have to know what we want to be true to and what we bring and who we are, which is how we show up in the workplace. Who am I? Who am I today? Not as in what's the character I'm putting on, but what do I bring to this situation? And then I'm defined by who I am and what I bring, not by what I'm called. Absolutely. If I've come from a place where I've been defined by the work I did, and now I'm defined by the title I've been given, the self-worth in that has been given up. When we understand my contribution is my ability to bring a group of people together, to motivate them towards completing a task, to give them the autonomy to do that task, and to guide them when they go off the rails, we would call that leadership. It doesn't need that title. It's the skill that you bring. It's the expertise that we bring to that situation that's of value. And so when you look at LinkedIn's a great place to do this, because LinkedIn's now an online CV for a lot of people. It's not what you've done, it's what you bring. So it's the expertise that comes from the experience, not the experience that you have. So if I take my SAS example, they are some of the best leaders, some of the best decision makers under pressure. They've been trained to work in the most extreme environments, in the most extreme pressure, and make decisions, calculated decisions. That's what's of value. That's their expertise, not being able to roll under a cargo net with a gun, stand up and command a situation with a firearm, because that doesn't work in the boardroom terribly well. So that's the experience they've got, but the expertise is decision making under pressure. What are a lot of teams very poor at doing? Making really pointy decisions very quickly under pressure. And so you look at that and you go, well, I can see value in that. It's not that you're a commando or that you've served in the SAS. It's that you're an exceptional leader because of the experience that links into your expertise. And that's true for everybody. If I sit down with someone who's been in a leadership role for 5 years, I don't care about the CV of how they got there. I care about what they know and how that applies to help somebody else. Because particularly in leadership positions, the job has gone from being about what you do to how you help other people do, because that's fundamentally what the leader should be doing. So yes, this defined piece, being defined by title, is a real hot button for me, because I see it. I meet people and the first thing they do is go, I am title. Well, no, you're not. Currently you are, because that's what's on your business card. But if I tear your business card up or set fire to it dramatically in front of you, now who are you? And for a lot of people, that's literally a 2-minute silent conversation while they try and figure that out. And that's not where we should be. As we get further into our careers, we want to be detaching ourselves from title and identity belonging to a company and take ownership of that.
Yeah. I do an exercise in some of my programs where I get people to create their impact statement, and they never like me at the time because I say to them, your impact statement must not include your job that you do today.
Yep.
And they go, what do you mean? Because the impact is all tied up. So I love this distinction between you've got this experience that you bring, but then it's about drawing out almost the characteristics, the capabilities, the attributes that then form what your expertise is. Because I see that as you described that, right? It's so clear around how that is transferable. It's not just about the job, that you've got today and the title on the business card. It is absolutely transferable. It's yours. Whereas your title is not always yours because you'll have a successor. You had a predecessor. It's a pattern that's passed on.
And if you look at all of the studies around the future of work, one, we have to know what we bring because certain things will be automated for sure, whether it's through AI, machine learning, or whatever else is going to follow that. So our contribution as a leader, as a human managing humans, is now even more critical than it's ever been.
Yeah.
But we're also going to have more jobs. That's the nature of work now. Is we don't join. My grandpa worked in a factory and he retired at 65 with the gold clock on the mantelpiece, and that was it. One company, his entire working career. Doesn't happen anymore. So this ability to go, okay, I'm coming from finance, but what could I do in the airline business? And unlocking the ability to move between industries, because the expertise, if I can help people go from being a trained soldier in the SAS commandos into a leadership position, that's pretty extreme transition, but it's so possible when you get to expertise, not experience, and not job titles.
Yeah.
And so the same is true. Someone who has been in a finance business can go into an airline business. Someone's been in an airline business can go into a offshore shipping company or a security firm if you understand your contribution and if you move away from being defined by a specific title and trying to get into a business at a certain level. And the titles are so hard to peg now in terms of levels and salary. Like it's everyone, agile workforces, agile titles, and scrum masters, and so forget all that. It's like, what do you bring?
Yeah.
Who are you? What are you about? What do you value? What are your non-negotiables? And what can this team expect from working with you? That's actually what matters.
Yeah. And that ties in nicely, which is a topic for another day. But, that online CV, which is effectively LinkedIn, which most of us are using. But, we do look for how people are infusing their brand into that, what they stand for, their values, as you say, their strengths. So being connected in, which ties into that self-awareness piece that you spoke about earlier, like being able to know that is, I think we've all got to have a sense of what that is, because that's what makes you stand out in a very, blue and white, because it is on LinkedIn, just a very crowded kind of place that looks, vanilla, much the same. Yeah.
So, yeah, for sure. And that's book number 2 is all going to be about that, how
Yeah.
we show up, what makes us relatable, what makes us stand out, and what are we prepared to speak up about. Those 3 things have to be in balance. We can't be seen to be alien to the tribe. The tribe needs to feel that we're relatable to them. That's kind of what the AI will be looking for. We need to stand for something that makes us distinctive. And we need to have a point of view about something in the world that also makes us stand out and makes us differentiated.
Yeah. So you're in the process, Fishy, from what you were saying around writing the book. How's it going?
Early days on this one. So having written one book, I learned a lot in that process, and I'm kind of in no rush to write the second book for a couple of reasons. One, it's a much bigger book. It's a lot more personal, this book. So getting the structure down, and you know what it's like, you've written the book, getting the structure. There's a lot more research in this book. So there's some fairly heavy, my background's in strategy. So reading research is sort of second nature to me, but there's a lot more research to get through. A lot of this relates back to our tribal past. So belonging, what belonging means to us, how we've grown up as in tribes, and how that leads to our behavior today. So yeah, I'm enjoying the research. Actually, I'm enjoying laying everything down and not rushing to the writing part. So it's probably a 2025 bookshelf book as opposed to a 24, but it's well underway.
Well, we were on a book writing quest, must be 15, 16 months ago, and you kind of skidded on in just before Christmas, and we were all looking at you going, yay. We were still so far from our own little deadlines, but No, and we can't underestimate what it takes, but that sounds like it's going to be awesome. And I love that you've got, a lot of, dare I say it, but that personal growth, that your lived experience around these areas. And I think they fit in beautifully with around, deliberate leadership. So being aware of how you show up is about, connecting in with yourself, but also then there's a level of trust and authenticity and vulnerability that's included in doing all that. So I can't wait to read that. So you have to keep us up to date, Fishy, on how you go with that. All right. No doubt with your experience, particularly in aviation, but even with the teams that you've worked with, I'm sure you have a story or two to share around deliberate leadership. Is there one that kind of comes to mind? So is there something that really stands out as a memorable lesson for you that relates to deliberate leadership that has helped you to be a more deliberate leader, or where perhaps you've helped others to be more deliberate leaders?
Yeah, I think there's one example, and actually this one isn't an aviation metaphor. I do have lots of them, but I'll go to a business example. So I worked with the Kirby family in a previous role who owned Village Roadshow. So at the time, a lot of movies, big blockbuster movies and theme parks.
Yeah.
And I was with John Kirby on the way to a meeting in a cab. I actually think it was his car with the driver, but we were on our way to a meeting and we were chatting. And I had a choice I was trying to make a decision between two kind of viable options, kind of my job as a strategist. And I wanted his advice. And his answer was super blunt. He's like, why are you agonizing over this? What happens if you do both? And I was like, ah. And so what I've learned since then, having played with that, is that we have this, it's called the paradox mindset, which is we're wired to think in terms of right and wrong, this or that. And if we think about challenges as an and, it not only gets away from the analysis, but it opens up our mindset. Yeah. So if you go, why can't I do A and B? And what happens if I did do A and B and I allow them to coexist together? We get to different answers. We also get to different problems. So sometimes when we go, okay, why can't I do A and B together? What would stop me doing that? We actually unlock the problem from a different perspective than the one we're trying to solve with A and B. So we get to a better solution because we solve the bigger problem, not the immediate problem. And sometimes we find a way of putting A and B together and get to a completely different answer to the one we were wrestling with, which was the right and wrong. So thinking about that, and rather than or, it's A or B. It's this situation or this, which was a real challenge for me because as a strategist, my job is to make informed decisions between A or B. And so having this mindset of, well, what if A and B could coexist? And it was just the bluntness with which I don't even think he took his eyes off the road and looked at me. He's just like, just do both.
Yeah.
And it was just that sort of 40, 50 years of business experience of playing with this. Well, what if we did that movie and that movie? What's the implications for the business? Is it money? Well, why don't we find the money if they're both going to be successful? That sort of mindset of why don't we do streaming and podcasts and broadcast at the same time, as opposed to we need to stop being this business and become this business. And everyone's like, oh, that's a wrestle. Well, let's do both. What's the limitation of doing both? They're really powerful questions to ask that kind of stop you in your tracks. And they're the questions I really love, are the ones that really make you, like you were saying earlier, when you ask people to write their impact statement, the things that stop us are the things that often we're avoiding trying to talk about, or we kind of know they're there, but we don't really want to address them. So I love those questions when people come up with something or even answers and people just like, they just stop you. And that was one of those pieces of advice that was just like, oh, and it has stuck with me. Yeah. There are lots of times now where I'm taking an A and a B and I'm going, well, what does C look like if we put A and B together? Yeah. So.
And you see then that it uncovers, and through that process, you probably discover a whole bunch of solutions that is very limiting to go binary. And we do that because our problem solver goes, yep, what's the quickest path for me here to kind of get out of this tension around solving this particular issue? But when you actually go, well, it doesn't have to be one of those two original thoughts, because what means, or what's saying that they have to be the two original thoughts that I'm playing with?
That's right.
Yeah. So and I guess that fits in. So, I mean, it fits in beautifully with what you do as a strategist, right? Because I imagine it gives you more areas to play with. So in your experience, leaders that don't really like the ambiguity of, well, I'll just explore C here, like the and versus the or, how do they fare in that kind of situation where do they readily go, yeah, I'll try this? Or do you get that resistance and pushback when you pose that suggestion?
So it's interesting because often that's where attention comes up. Sometimes it's why are we having this conversation? We're here to decide on A or B, because a bunch of work has been done on A and B, and the premise is that we're coming together to resolve A or B, and now someone's brought an alternative in, so there can be an interesting tension around why we're having this conversation, which in itself, again, if there's tension, let's go and explore that. Why are we having that conversation? And sometimes that's because, and this is a real interesting one with leaders and strategy, sometimes that tension is because someone thinks they've got the answer. And what they're looking to do is validate they have the right answer, which reinforces that right or wrong. And when the leader has the answer, one of the biggest issues with strategy is when people aren't taken on the journey and the leader has the answer. And I've seen this fail spectacularly in quite senior situations where someone comes into a new leadership position, they come into the business from an external position with the answer. And it's not that the answer is wrong, it's that people aren't bought into that is the answer. So there has to be a process of taking people on the journey to buy into this is the direction, particularly if there's a change. If there's a change of direction, you can find yourself getting a huge amount of resistance because people have not been on that journey. So there's a real wrestle with this right or wrong concept. And if someone's come into a situation hoping to validate that they are right, and now there is an alternative, it undermines that concept of, well, I'm right and I'm just here to validate that. So that's what sometimes gets surfaced in that tension. Another piece is that this is a delay. This is just going to take more time to think about this from a different angle. And so there's an impatience to move forward. And again, that's always worth exploring. It's like, why are we rushing? We need to make this decision. And we've got to this point. We just need to get the group together and make a decision with A or B. It's like, okay, why? Why has this suddenly got some urgency to it? And, often if we spend 3 months on the wrong path, what happens is we spend 3 months backtracking, we've wasted 6.
Yeah.
So sometimes just slowing things down a little bit and understanding what's and again, there's a whole bunch of things that play into urgency. There's other things happening in the business. If we can get this decision made, then that might help my promotion into this role. Those things can sometimes then start to surface. So yes, there is often tension around we're just here to talk about A and B. Why are we having a different conversation?
And it sounds like some of that tension is also about serving the individual need versus the collective need. And so often when we're trying to minimize the choice, when we're trying to minimize the discussion, no, let's just stick to the original path. From what you're saying there, what I'm taking away is that there's often that individual preservation around validating my idea, or the tension, the challenge that I might perceive in, or if we go to a C, what does that look like?
100%. And I often, I don't just enjoy going into that tension because I think it's always worth exploring. I will go there because I see it as part of my job. My job is not to leave those tensions undiscussed. Sometimes it leads to we need to have a different conversation, maybe a narrower conversation with a smaller group of people. And again, often I'll get brought in as an external because there's a camp for A and there's a camp for B. And neither camp was thinking about a C. And it's not that we're trying to find C to moderate the two and placate the debate. It's actually there could be an alternative, and everyone's now become rooted in an A versus a B, and it's literally there's two sides of the room. They've sat around the boardroom table, and left side's A, right side's B. And my job is not to validate A or B. My job is to find the right solution with the group of people in the room who are nearly always very smart, but have somehow got locked into a debate, a kind of university debate of, well, we believe in A and we believe in B, and your job's to help us get to which one's right. It's like, well, no, it's not. My job is actually to find the best solution for this team to help you all move forward.
Yeah.
And so those tensions are really interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess it moves you from it's facilitator but not moderator, because you're probably not there to just moderate the two views or sides as a most apparent in that in that part of the discussion, I guess.
Yeah, how do we get to growth? How do we unlock the real possibility?
Yeah. Lovely. And I think, Fishy, that probably leads us beautifully into the last question I'd love to ask you, which is, so in that moving into growth and unlocking possibility, what strategies do you believe are best for leaders that really want to work on being more deliberate in how they lead, but also how they lead themselves, lead their teams, and lead strategy?
For me, this one's really simple. Start with yourself and keep working on you. Understand what drives you, what motivates you, what makes you angry, why, what fears you have and where they come from, the one that no one really wants to talk about. The more you work on yourself, the more adaptive and resilient and ready to help others you will be. You know what triggers you and why. You know when you walk into a workshop situation why you're uncomfortable, or if you're in a one-on-one, why you're uncomfortable in that one-on-one. You can, as you become more confident in that, you can actually start to articulate that to people and go, hey, look, you know what? This environment is a trigger for me, because that's the human to human conversation that we crave. We feel fake fast.
Yeah.
And so the more we put on leadership, the more we see it as a something we wear to make us feel invincible, to allow us, when the lift doors open, to step out and be the leader we want to be. The more we have that mindset, the more we're suppressing who we actually are. And the more we connect as people, the more we relate to each other, and we feel like we belong together in a safe space where we can do our best work. That comes from us showing up as us. And we can only do that when we know who we are.
Yeah. I love that. The visual is so strong. Getting out on a floor or entering a building, or even getting online on a whatever, a Zoom or a Teams meeting, and adopting a persona that we think fits our mindset of what a leader needs to be. But a thing I'll say often is that it takes less energy just to lead as you are, rather than having to think differently about, so I've got my leadership jacket on today, so this is how, this is the energy I need to bring. That's so tiring.
Yeah,
it's exhausting.
it is. Yeah, and then you'll be that. Then I'm going into a more senior conversation, so I need to step it up a little bit. And the one thing I'd say, the vulnerability word came up earlier, and the one thing I'll say about vulnerability, because it ties into this space that we're talking about, vulnerability without acceptance is a hot mess.
Yeah.
So you can't be, we're told we've got to be more vulnerable. I had a terrible morning this morning and blah, blah, blah. It's difficult to get the kids ready and all this. But if you don't accept yourself first, being vulnerable in the workplace will not come across well. Vulnerability has to, the more vulnerable we are, the more we're letting ourselves out, right? It's like we're putting ourselves on show. We're taking off the cloak and we're going, this is actually the t-shirt I wear everywhere I go. And it is. I have Mr. Simple t-shirts, and I wear a white t-shirt or a blue t-shirt in pretty much everything I do, because that's who I am and I'm comfortable with that. And if you want me to wear a tie, I'm not going to turn up. So that's how it is. But it comes from a place of acceptance.
Yeah.
When you accept who you are, then you can be comfortable being, you don't have to be super comfortable, but you can be vulnerable from a place of acceptance. When we're not, that's when people burst into tears in a team meeting trying to be vulnerable, because they're actually tapping into something they've not yet accepted about themselves.
Yeah.
So there's a real watch out, I think, because there's such a movement behind vulnerability in a really good way, but no one's talking about the risks in there that we need to work through in the real world.
I love that. So like, I feel that hot mess that you talk about, or that often I'll refer to it, leaders that try and do vulnerability through oversharing is a big risky kind of strategy in my mind, because it is, you kind of taking the layers off, but without having put some boundaries, or even making yourself safe in doing that. So I think that whole point around acceptance for me is around, there's something in there that I've made it safe for myself because I have accepted it. I've taken it on. I've even found words or methods in which to communicate it which feel right for me. And it means that when you're sharing that in the spirit of supporting someone else, assisting someone else, helping something resonate or click in for them, it's less about you, because your hot mess is not on display, because then people go, oh my gosh, there's vulnerability. I've got to attend to that. That's the driver for the vulnerability, is to share, so people go, okay, yep, even other people feel this, so it's okay for me to, you're kind of making it okay. You're giving them that sense of environment that it's okay, but not when you're seeing stuff spill out like this, oversharing stuff that I see all too often.
100%. So I think the very simple way I look at it, because I'm all about simplicity, awareness is what we let in. It's not that it's not there. It's always there. Our past is always there. Awareness is what we choose to let in. Acceptance is what we choose to make of it. And vulnerability is what we let out.
Yeah.
And if you work through it in that way, if you think about it like a big tank, at the top of the tank is your entire life from the moment you were born to now. It's happened. We can't change that. The next tank underneath that is what we choose to let from that top tank into the next tank. Then we process that, and then it's there sitting there, and it's available to us having been processed. It's kind of like clean water, ready to drink the moment we need it. But if we're just suddenly opening up the big tank that we've never processed and never thought about before because someone in a team meeting shared something we think we should, that's when we can be that yeah, too vulnerable, too open, sharing for the wrong reasons. So there's a little bit of control, I think,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that self-awareness piece.
Yeah, that boundaries and safety. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's a nice viewpoint to the discussion, I think, on vulnerability, authenticity. And it's not, I think people, yeah, I often think about it as just having these boundaries, not so you're being disingenuous, because you want to create a situation where people don't trust. But I think we do have to almost filter it for ourselves. So we then trust ourselves with that too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Self-awareness and self-confidence.
Yeah.
And self-confidence is the understanding of, I've processed this. I know what that means. I know why when that happens, I get angry. That's the acceptance of a past fear that lives there, and it's always going to be there. That's what happened as a child, and that created the fear, and the fear can be triggered. Now I understand that string of events, and now I can talk about that. And so, whereas if that's not processed, then the trigger still exists. We can still be triggered in certain situations. We can still go from fear to rage in certain situations because we haven't processed that.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Fishy, for sharing those insights today. There's so much that I've taken. I've got pages of notes. If people want to find you, we're going to put your website in the show notes. So we'll make sure that's there rather than people, trying to find something to write it down right now. But your new, I'm not going to call it the title of the book because it'll probably, I don't know what it will be, but it's going to be around how we show up and form meaningful connections. And I can't wait to read it. Thanks so much for your time today, Fishy, on the Deliberate Leader podcast.
Rita, it's been an absolute pleasure. Love the chat, and I'm sure we could go for another couple of hours, but I'm sure we can regroup as we move through the year.
Certainly can. I look forward to doing it again. Take care.
Thank you.